Hi, welcome to the Authentically You show. This is a show where we're always interviewing authentic people doing amazing, authentic things. And I'm really excited today to have with us Martha Adams. Martha has dedicated her career to helping her clients plan and achieve their financial goals. Throughout this journey, she discovered a common theme that she was determined to change: the negativity around financial conversations. The discussion around money and finances has traditionally been met with confusion, uncertainty, and overall disconnect. Martha's passion for changing the conversation around money and finances has been the focus of her life's work. Martha, welcome to the show.
Good after what evening? What time zone are we in?
We're in so many time zones, it doesn't even matter. I'm just living in all of them, right? Like I was
Me
in
too.
Switzerland. I was in
Clearly, I
Switzerland
am
time zone
too.
this morning. You're in wait, Canada. Are you in Canada? Yeah, you're in Canada right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally okay. Good morning, good afternoon. You know, I've been up since 4:30 a.m.
Me
So it's
too, actually. So there you go.
see, we're working women. I mean, this is
We
just how
are.
it goes. So, well, I'm so glad to have you on the show because we're talking about something that is such a hot topic. And
Mhm.
we'll talk about your book in this, but your book was a real revelation for me. It was definitely, I feel like it was like financial therapy for me because I was reading it and having like moments of like, oh my God, okay, now I get it. So I'm really excited to dive into this. But before we get too far into your book, I want to talk about how did you get into not only the financial industry, but emotions and finance and EQ, because that's very different than a typical conversation, especially from someone like me who's taught business at the college. We never talked about EQ or emotional intelligence or anything when it came to finances. So I'd love to hear, and I know our listeners would too, how you got into this.
Well, I was really fortunate to, have grown up in a situation, whether it was in my household or in my community, where I simply didn't fit in. And ultimately that became my asset because I created it as an asset, right? Within myself. Where, in a lot of ways I was the black sheep. And for me, that showed me the power of our EQ, right?
Mhm.
Who was making ultimately the decisions, and so that's really where focusing on the EQ came from. So in the community that I grew up in, I was really different in that I grew up in a small town that was, materially wealthy. It was actually one of the most wealthy uh, neighborhoods in Canada as a whole, actually, when I was growing up. And so here I was, this, small immigrant family coming in to the city with a starter home. And so I didn't have the material wealth of everyone around me, and so that meant my experience was really different. Add to that, personality wise, I was also very different than my cultural community, and as a result my household as well. And so those all became assets for me because of the way I felt about them. And this is where I connected with an idea that uh, I could emotionalize my experiences to the positive, and that for me changed the game. So that's why I then went into the financial industry, looking to make a difference and ultimately change the game.
I love that. And I love that you're very open about saying that you didn't fit in. I don't know how many of us I felt the exact same way. I always felt like I stuck out and I definitely got bullied and kids were mean. And the good part of it is it really helped shape me like you to move into a direction of an area of need, which I love.
Mhm.
And especially for women in finances, I know you and I have had this conversation many times outside of this about women and finances and the negativity and the lack of education and even community and culture expectations. Um, God bless my mother. She used to say things. She was just very traditional, like, well, honey, you're not good with money. So you don't want to be an accountant, and so right away I would think like, oh, you're right. I need to stay away from money. And so it was something that was really a negative. As I read your book, I'm like, wow, I do have negative emotions attached to different things like that. And which brings me to your book here, which, okay, I'm gonna hold it here. It's hard for me to see, but here we go. Wait. There we go. Okay, first, everyone, is she just not like gorgeous in this? She looks like Cleopatra, and she's this gorgeous in person too. So this book that came out, which I feel is such an inspiring and just changing the game for how we look at this. I want to talk about this and what you have in it. And of course, okay, hold on. I've got it here too. Got things stuffed everywhere. All right, here's the book club. The book club to
I'm
the
impressed. You're a magician right now.
I know I'm pulling things out of everywhere. You can't see it, but I'm pulling them out. So you have the book and you have the book club. It's called Cleopatra's Riches. What can you give us a little bit of story about the Cleopatra part? Because I know people are going, Cleopatra's Riches, like what goes with that? And you look just like Cleopatra, by the way. I swear she could be your sister. Uh, so tell us a little bit about Cleopatra's Riches, and we'll dive into some different subjects in that.
So the name Cleopatra came to be because, I shared with you that when I was growing up, in so many ways, I felt that I didn't fit in, and so I held on to what I associated to the positive. And one of those things was that when I was growing up, my mom would always tell me that I was a direct descendant of Cleopatra. And I felt so special. And I held on to that because, here I was, this young girl that looked different from everyone around her and certainly felt different. And yet I had the richness of ancient Egypt that ran through me, and that connection to Cleopatra is something that I held really close. And well, Julie, until I grew up and then learned that every other Egyptian mother tells their daughter that she's a direct descendant of Cleopatra. And so I can remember the day where, I found that out. And I mean, talk about a bubble being burst. And, and then this is where, again, emotionalizing to the positive really came into play for me, because I recognized that I could decide what that meant.
Mm,
That richness, that riches and richness is something truly internal to us.
mm,
And so is our money story.
mhm.
And so that's why it's Cleopatra's Riches,
I
connected, to our stories and the richness of that all the way to our origin story.
Well, I love that, and I think you are related to Cleopatra. I mean, there's too much of a striking resemblance, so we're gonna go with that. So you mentioned origins, and one of my questions was from your book, how do your origins and upbringing affect your finances?
Mm, in so many ways they do, because these are our roots. And these are, the stories that in so many ways we default to. These are experiences that we default to without necessarily recognizing that we are. So,
Mm,
what do I mean by that? Well, you were sharing something, Julie, about your upbringing. And, one of the things that your mom would say. And those messages end up becoming repeated in our minds, even when we start to think about our money story. We so often will default right to our household because it's that influential, it's that concentrated of an influence. And the key thing there is that the messaging that we experienced growing up in our households didn't just show up overnight. It showed up over time. And that is from the richness of our origin story. So stories of feast and famine are, woven throughout the messages that we received.
mm,
And so, we could experience something that our parents would say, right? I had a friend of mine, I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine who, in her origin story was the Irish potato famine.
mm,
And even though that was generations before us, right? She because of the story she was told, that fear of lack and scarcity was so real in the present
Mm.
tense. And we carry that with us and we make decisions based on it. So it affects the way we feel, what we believe, and ultimately into our results. So it is one of the greatest opportunities we have when it comes to connecting with our own money story.
Yeah, and, it's interesting you mentioned the potato famine. My grandfather always mentioned the depression, and he would absolutely be like, "Don't trust the banks, like, put your money in a can, buried in the ground," and as long as I can remember, he preached about the depression, right? And that was my
Mhm.
father, which of course was my mother's dad, which my mother definitely reflected that, which I learned about it. And I still remember that. And I definitely do those things. I absolutely, when the economy looks like it's going to tank, I am like bulking up food. I'm like stocking the pantry. And it seems so funny. You always have this joke, like I'm always like apocalypse ready, right? But if you look back on it, my grandfather, which he was doing it out of his heart because he had lived through the depression, how horrible it was, he wanted to make sure that our future generations were prepared if something like that happened. And so I really relate to that because as I was going through your book, I really started going back on my origin stories. Why do I behave the way I do in these financial situations? And it was really helpful. And another part that really spoke to me was, how does community affect your finances?
Mhm.
When I was going into business, I was very much told women don't do business. I was told
Mhm.
I should be an English teacher. Nothing wrong with an English teacher, but you don't want me to be your English teacher. So a community really affected for quite a while. I fought it and I did end up going down the path eventually I wanted to, but I really was affected by how community projected what my career should be. And so when I saw
Mhm.
you have this in your book, how does community affect your finances? I really thought, well, that was important to talk about because it feels like this is such a powerful thing as well, besides just your family.
It's so true. I mean, each of the layers of influence we have in our money story, and we've talked about now into the second one, they each impact the way we earn, grow, and enjoy money in our lives. And community does that as well. I mean, community is where we first start to experience comparison. I mean, we certainly can experience it in our household, but now we're experiencing it on a bigger scale, right?
Mhm,
So we're compared in our classroom, and when it comes to the way we earn money, we can, be encouraged or perhaps pushed, depend on how you want to look at it, uh, into what is a practical career choice. And that's something that you were highlighting there, Julie, in your experience. And, I certainly experienced that as well, knowing that I wanted to go into business. And in grade 10, when I was, able to select my, the specific courses that I wanted to take, my electives, and I was choosing anything and everything related to business because that was my spark. And when I practiced that spark, it increased my confidence. And now I had my magic formula, right? Where I could then uh, have my value proposition where I would make a difference in the world. And I remember getting called into my guidance counselor's office in the most intimidating of fashions. And so, here I am. And from a teacher perspective, I was, what would be categorized as a good kid,
mm.
right? Did my homework, right? And so here I was being called on I'm pointing because I can still see where I was sitting and where the intercom was, and I'm being called to go to the guidance counselor's office by name, right? Specifically my class. And I remember all my classmates going that, ooh, like she's in trouble. And
Oh my gosh.
right. So the whole thing was really intimidating. And this is one of the things that community can do. really starting to talk about where we fit into the world, right?
Mhm.
And then, on how we grow, so how we're interacting with our finances. Community is a really big part of that, because we kind of have this cycle of where parents feel the school should be teaching it, schools feel that the parents should be teaching it, and then it's this kind of vicious cycle where we're not really engaging with our finances. We're certainly
Mm.
not taught to. We haven't had that experience,
Mhm.
right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
then all we see is spending,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
so that's so community, while we don't necessarily think about it right away, we'll think much more of our household. Community has a very powerful influence in our
Mm.
lives.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I mean, everything from billboards to TV to commercials. I used to teach a marketing class, and I would tell the students, on your way home, I want you to count every single advertisement you see on the way home. And they would always come back with this staggering number, and they'd say, I never noticed it before. I said, well, you didn't consciously notice it, but as you drove, all of those marketing were being, your mind was catching them. Your mind can see X amount of things at a time, and it was embedding into your mind. And we talk a lot about this with women and how they look, and how our youth, especially our young women, are really kind of groomed to think that they have to look a certain way, be a certain way, because that's what they see on TV. And so I fully agree. As I mentioned, I had several people tell me that, business was not for women and I would never be able to compete. And I should go find my place where I'm supposed to be doing a job as a preschool teacher or something. Once again, you do not want me to be a preschool teacher. I would not be good. So I didn't it's just interesting because community really does have a strong pull, and I think we could apply this in so many different areas where we lack, women engineers or science or things like that. So as we talk about all this, you mentioned the emotions, and this is really the really big part of how our emotions are tied to our finances.
Mhm.
And oftentimes I talk about fear and how
Mhm.
powerful fear is, and how fear can literally stop people from doing some of the most simple things. And so, I look at emotions and my emotions and how they're tied to it, right? And so, my family, my father was always a very even keel person.
Mhm.
Um, and he was never excited or fearful or anything like that. And so I'm very even keel when it comes to dealing with these things. But my mother, on the other hand, was a real emotional, lively person attached to these things as well. So I find myself kind of float between and learn. Now, when I went off to college, I had never had a checking account. I'd never had checks. I'd never been educated in credit cards or anything like that. I was just jumping into it, getting my first bank account. And so for me, I had a lot of hard lessons with money and understanding it and how to use it. So I'd love to talk about this, especially things have changed so much over the last 20 years since you and I have been in school. Finances are so different. We have 10-year-olds making millions of dollars on YouTube. So
Right.
when you talk about emotions and our finances, I know you teach and preach to this. Talk to us about those emotions and finances.
So when I say emotion and finances, right away, we can either draw blank or immediately think of the negative. So think about things like stress, worry, fear, right? The reason is that, well, we really haven't had the opportunity to connect and prioritize or honor the way we feel that's been formed over time, right? So when we talk about finances, we'll often hear financial literacy, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the IQ. Is that important? Yes, of course it is. But we talk about that from this as the starting place. Where I feel differently, where I believe we can have very different results, is by starting to ask different questions. And that is focusing on the human experience of money.
Mm,
Now we're actually talking about the way that you feel. Now we're talking about something that's unique to you. This is the financial conversation that speaks with you versus at you,
mm. Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
if you think about any event in your life of any size or level of significance, money was there in some way, shape, or form. Money was there
Yeah.
playing a role. And
Mm.
along with that came your emotional associations. When we start to see that, you start to see you.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. And I fully agree. And it's interesting because, like you said, finances never seem to have a positive ring to it unless you're making a lot of money. Right. And then it feels great. You're like, I have so much money. I love finances. Right.
Not necessarily true. So
No.
I'm gonna myth bust that
Okay. Myth bust
with
it.
so much love, because in the work I do, it really clearly shows that no matter the like the human experience around money does not discriminate to asset level. It really doesn't matter. I'll give you an example. There was someone I was working with, and he very successful, came from a successful family, but built himself from the ground up. Kind of took a career choice that was not approved, right? Kind of more.
Yeah.
So had a family in sciences, went into arts, like, oh, this is right, definitely
Yeah.
didn't have the blessing of the family on it, so built himself, right? But fear was so deep seated for him because his father's voice was constantly in his ear. You could lose it all overnight. You
Mm,
could lose it all overnight. You could lose it all overnight.
mm,
And so it impacted his decisions. It impacted the growth of his business. It impacted his marriage.
mm,
It didn't matter what his asset level was. It's all relative,
mm,
right? The human experience is the human experience. And so when we honor that, it doesn't become about anything or anyone else.
mm.
It becomes about you and where you want to go.
My gosh. I feel like I'm in therapy right now. This is so if I couch, I just lay down and be like, okay, you're now going to give me my financial therapy. Really, really great point and great myth busting because you're right. As you say that, I'm like, ah, okay, yeah, you're right. That is true. And so powerful. I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, you talk in the book about it, you talk in the book club about it, the 4R process. Can you fill us in on that?
Absolutely. So when we look at the human experience of money, and we said earlier that there's messaging that we haven't had the opportunity to recognize or ultimately hear yet. It's playing over and over, and we're seeing it in our decisions, we're seeing it in our results, but we haven't necessarily had the opportunity to connect to where it's coming from yet. So, therefore, it's something that's taking up space.
Mm,
How do we then get from where we are to where we want to go? We've got to
mm,
create space for it. And that's exactly what the 4R process does.
mm,
It allows you to honor yourself in the money conversation and honor the way that you feel as your greatest asset. I was having a conversation the other week, and someone said to me, um, you know, uh, it was a really depreciating comment about themselves, that they are very all over the place when it comes to their finances. That they're an emotional wreck is the term they
mm,
used. And I said, great, that's your greatest asset. And they stop and they look at me and they're like, me being an emotional wreck is my greatest asset? And I said, yes. Because if I ignore that, and most importantly, if they ignore that, and all we're talking about is the IQ, right?
Mhm.
And I'm talking at them saying this, that, and the other, and all these terms and all these, facts, figures, and strategies. Did the way they feel, did it go away?
Hmm.
It's
No.
still there. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's still there. And so when you view it as a liability, that's all it will continue to be.
Hmm.
Right? Because we either ignore it, suppress it, end up in avoidance.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But when we honor it as, hey, this is my indicator. This is something that's uniquely mine. So instead of me asking how, which is what we're used to doing in finances, right? How do I get out of debt? How do I do this? How do I do that? And living out someone else's vision, I can now ask why. That's what the 4R process does. It
Yeah.
allows you to recognize what it is, right? That you're feeling, which you gave a perfect example earlier on your mom, right?
Mhm.
Now you can move to the second R, which is to reconcile.
Mm.
Reconcile where that messaging came from. What was your perspective? Now,
Mm.
when you understand your perspective and you have empathy for yourself, you can now have empathy for the other characters in the story and
Mm.
start to see their perspective. Now, you've learned so much in this already
Mhm.
from the first 2 R's. And the thing is that in a lot of ways, we might be slightly used to that in one way or another. But when we're in the first 2 R's, are we focused on the positive or the negative?
Mm. The negative, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And so it's far too often, and by far too often, I really do mean like 98% of the time, that we're focused on those first 2 R's. And so we're caught in this negative cycle, still not getting anywhere. So this is where we go to the third R of release. And we're not just releasing from anywhere, we're releasing now what you have decided no longer serves you, because you're seeing the way it's impacted you in your life and releasing what no longer serves you. But the way you're doing it is what makes all the difference, because
Mm.
here you're focusing on gratitude for what you've learned,
Mm.
saying thank you,
Mm.
and I let you go, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're taking your power back. Now you're owning your voice. Now, here's the thing. Do you think that just doing that is enough?
Probably not. There's gotta be one more
Exactly.
step.
Yes, there is. You're right. There is 4 R's. I kind of gave it away a little bit, but
I feel it. No, I felt that. I felt you pushing me. You're like, "Julie, there's one more step."
there is, because that messaging that you discovered, that you recognized, was it formed overnight? Did you
Nope.
experience it over? Exactly.
Mm.
And so this is now our greatest opportunity to form a new habit by repeating that new positive association.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I'll give you an example that I experienced in my life. We talked about how I really stood out growing up. In fact, I was bullied
Mm.
growing up, right?
Mhm.
Now, the people that were bullying me were really wealthy, right? They were materially wealthy. I could have very easily said that people with money are bad people, because that was my emotional experience, right?
Mhm.
But if I did that, who would have had the control? Who was taking up space? Was I owning my space, or was someone else in control?
Yeah. Someone else. Yeah.
Exactly. They would have been in control. So
Mm.
this is where I look at emotionalizing to the positive. I looked at myself to say, well, that made me really comfortable standing out, right? That made me
Mhm.
really comfortable owning my voice and saying, no, this is who I am. And this is who I am deciding to be and continue to grow into. And so
Yeah.
the result was that I was really comfortable standing up in an industry where I was in no way represented, right? As an
Mhm.
independent, as a woman, independent in the financial industry. So that meant that I did not have the name or financial backing of any company or group of companies,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
That's the power of positive emotional associations.
Mm.
You decide who you are, where you are, and where you're going, most
Mm.
importantly, right?
Yeah.
And so, the power of positive repetition.
It's so powerful, and it's really interesting that you say owning your own power because I have a little chapter in my book called "Owning Your Own Power," and you make some excellent points because we've probably all been guilty of letting those negative emotions in, like you talked about your experience and our experiences, hinder us from where we want to go and what we want to do because it's taking up so much negative space in our lives. So, I think this is something, and for those of you who are listening or watching, just that example that Martha is giving, you can practice. You can start moving forward with that. So, and we're starting to run out of time, but I wanted to make sure first, are there anything happening with you that you want our listeners to know about where you're speaking, what you're doing, things on the website they should go to? I want to make sure I know Josh has things running across the bottom of your book and your website, but anything that they should know about coming up.
Yes. So, one of the things that I'm really excited about is the opportunity to work one on one for free with someone through the show that I do. So, I am a financial specialist on a show called City Line. It's daytime television. It's the longest running daytime show in North America, actually, and so it's an amazing, amazing program made by women for women. And if you write in, then and share a little bit of your money story and why you would love to the opportunity to have a conversation together. Um, it would be you and I on camera working together, and then you would be, of course, I'm completely invested in you. You would have that one-on-one help, and at the same time showing strength in your vulnerability, you'd be helping so many other women as well. And so right on the site you can see some of the segments and some of the people that I've helped as well. So I would love to be able to help more people with that.
Oh, that I love, love, love that. So yes, if you're listening, oh my gosh, do this. Like, I mean, this is just, it's so easy, right? Right in. And like I said, I think Josh has got the website running across here. He's probably trying to look up that right now to put it on the screen. So I love that. Also, Martha is going to be one of our women at our San Diego Lead and Empower Her She Talks happening on October 11th. So you guys need to get tickets to that. Last time we had 250 women show up and we sold out. So you can go to leadandempowerher.com, click on that. We also have other locations starting to load. So if you can't make it to San Diego, but you should because San Diego is awesome, especially all my Texas friends who are dying in heat right now. You
I
guys should
bet.
be coming. It's a vacation. So I'm really excited that we're going to get a chance to see that. It looks like Josh is putting that up on the screen. We love producer Josh. He's so amazing. He's just making all this stuff happen. And then finally, just if we could, I mean, obviously, we talked about so many amazing things that you've given us on finances. And I really, really encourage you guys to get this book. So eye-opening, easy read. I'm actually implementing it into one of our business courses at the college, into our personal finance course that I'm working with Martha on, so that students will actually really start to look at the EQ of their finances. So we're really excited about that. but grab the book. It's amazing and I love it. And how about one last tip to send everyone off today, if you can give to our listeners?
I would love to. Julie, if it's okay, before I do, October 1st, she talks up to October 1st, not 11th, October 1st. I've
Yeah.
got your
Oh,
back.
did
You've
I
got
say
my back. I've
11?
got yours.
Oh my gosh, October 1st. I didn't even
I've
realize I
got
said
you.
that. Thank you.
See, you
See,
had me. I wasn't sure if it was morning or night. We're
I
just
know, you
working
know,
all the time.
this is why I need all my lady friends here. So all of you guys watching, we all keep each other together. So, when we're having that. So see, we got it.
We got
You're
it.
the best.
You're the best.
Oh my gosh.
I would love to share a takeaway for everyone. So, um, when we are talking about our emotions around money, we're often quite depreciating of ourselves. And so I'd love the opportunity to shift that together. And to do that, I'd love to share with you a phrase that I've put together for a reason. I'll share that with you. So I'll share the phrase and I'll share the reason. It is to give yourself the grace of understanding with the commitment to move forward.
Mm,
So now, the reason I've put this together is because it is an active statement all the way through. It starts with a positive command: give yourself, right?
mhm,
Now, what are you giving yourself? Grace. How do you feel when you hear the word grace?
mm,
The grace of understanding now. Because now your emotions are an asset. The way you feel is an asset because you're able to understand yourself, right? And asking why. Now, I'm not asking you here to feel sorry for yourself or stay stuck in that, right? Because now here's the next part. I'm asking you to commit to yourself. Now, where are you committing? What direction are you looking? It's forward looking,
mm.
right? So give yourself the grace of understanding and take your power back with the commitment to move forward.
Wow, that is so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for being on the show. You guys are going to see so much more from Martha. She's just doing amazing things. I call you the Dr. Phil of finances. Um, but better. Sorry, Dr. Phil. Um, because I'm biased, but I want to thank you for being on the show. And we'll just end the show like I always say: live, love, laugh, and always be your authentic self.